Hey guys, welcome back to Total Tactics FPL. Today's video is going to be my Game Week 23 team selection. If you guys haven't watched my cheat sheet video already, that's my recap of all the assets that I think are viable in FPL. So my full thoughts on the midfielders, the defenders, the forwards, and the goalkeepers that I think are great to go over the next few weeks have been incorporated in that video. As far as this video, this is going to be just purely my team selection. I feel like I haven't actually recapped how my team has done historically and what my general thoughts are with the players. Of course, we've been talking about prospective transfers, but I think it's nice to just have an overall kind of stopgap here to just discuss the state of my team and what I think going forwards. In terms of Game Week 23, I think it was overall quite successful in terms of how my team has been set up. The reality, of course, is that I don't have triple City and I don't have triple Arsenal because I went out of Martinelli into Fernandes and I now have kept KDB. I like the transfer because for me, the option of keeping Fernandes was quite interesting, or at least just being flexible in terms of being able to go for Nketiah or Odegaard. And I put Mitchell and Andreas on the bench, and I think that was the right decision. Of course, Trent ended up being outscored, same with De Bruyne. But the reality is, Trent has to be a keep for me because of Game Week 25 and that double Game Week fixture. He still was actually able to almost slip Darwin in with an assist. And this isn't just me kind of going through a tired rhetoric of why Trent's a good asset. In reality, he's not. I mean, this Liverpool defense has been calamitous and they've been a very, very shocking team defensively. But I still think Trent provides a lot of value on the attacking point of view. And inevitably, he's going to get probably a goal or assist. And a double Game Week fixture, which is quite nice for Liverpool in Game Week 25, is a good reason for me to keep him at least. And after that, I'm happy to bin him off for another Chelsea player, which is going to be my loose plan going forwards, because you also have to factor in why no triple City for now. I think blank Game Week 28 is very, very likely to be a City blank game week, and I don't really see my team needing triple City for the time being. I've talked about my thoughts on Ake and Akanji, and I've expressed them in the sense that magically Pep will probably wake up and realize Ruben Diaz and Laporte is in the team, and I don't really want to deal with further transfers with my team with Ake or Akanji being brought in, especially given that one of the fixtures this week is a very, very tough game where I don't really see City keeping a clean sheet versus Arsenal. But that's just my personal thoughts. As far as De Bruyne, though, I'm very happy to keep because he's a very simple move towards Salah in 25. And then the rest of my team structurally, of course, I have a couple of issues, right? Patterson is someone that I'm hoping will be able to be back for my team in Game Week 25, so you can actually play the double as an Everton player. The other transfer that I might do is simply Patterson to Kilman, because I think I actually prefer Wolves fixtures, specifically from 24 onwards, and then also just simply the double in 25. I think I prefer Wolves because I think actually Liverpool is a much less fearsome team than Everton, even though, of course, Everton have already gotten a clean sheet versus Arsenal. That's just my thoughts. As far as Shaw, I actually think he looked fantastic versus Leeds, and I think Sancho actually coming back into the United team actually made him look like an even better asset. The combination play of Shaw and Sancho, I think, will be quite electric on the left. It's quite a level above, I would say, from any kind of interplay between the right back and the right wing that United presently have as a starting combination. Now, of course, we did see Pellistri actually send the ball to Dalot, who actually got the assist versus Rashford, but I think, of course, you guys know what I mean. As far as White, I think he's a bit of a problem. He, of course, still the starting right back for Arsenal. I don't think that will change, and I think he is a clearly much better ball progressing defender than Tomiyasu. But we are heading towards a sea of fixtures that are very, very close in terms of the scheduling, and I think White will probably get rotated in 59 minutes, 60 minutes, that sort of territory where I think it makes sense to make a transfer away, and I'll talk about White in just a second. Kepa, of course, is just a keeper, and then Trippier and Rashford are the ones specifically that I'd like to keep, with Fernandes, of course, circled as probably the cash cow that I'd move out of this week in Game Week 23 so that I can move into assets like Mahrez and Saka, which I'll be talking about in just a second when I move on to my midfield transfers for Game Week 23. As far as Nonto, extremely happy I picked him, and I was very happy to actually go for a player that I had already known, had already seen make his debut for Italy, for example, but I'm not going to beat that dead horse. Just happy to see him do well, and I'm actually very happy to also own him for Game Week 25 when he gets to play Southampton. As far as Erling Haaland, of course, once again, we hit another week where he's going to be a very likely triple captain candidate, but you now have the option of going for Mo Salah in 25, although I know a lot of people have already been let down by him and won't be going there, but I have somewhat survived the Rashford green hit by actually getting a green arrow this week, or the triple captain, sorry, so I'm quite happy to have actually gotten a green arrow this week. And in reality, I think my team isn't in the worst state possible. We actually move towards Ben White and talking about him more specifically. I just wanted to talk about the minutes and his position in the team. I think the reality is, as I said, I think he's probably going to start most of the games. I'd suspect that he's going to start 80 to 90% of the remaining Premier League fixtures this season as long as he's fit. But we have already seen, for example, from a minutes point of view, that he's had some dangerous substitutions. Man United being a very good example of that, where Rashford was cooking him in the first half, had already forced a yellow card very early on for White, and therefore he was subbed off for Tomiyasu, who actually deputized really well in that 45 minutes in the back half. And perhaps the question is actually, are there enough dangerous threats towards or at the same level of Rashford that will cause for White to actually be subbed off early? Because a lot of people do mention, for example, Ben White's championship run with Leeds, where he was able to play a lot of games. And of course, we've already seen that Arteta has shown the faith in him earlier in the season when Tomiyasu was actually injured. So I think the concern is a situation like the Brighton game, where actually at the time Arsenal had not conceded, but Tomiyasu was brought in to try and reinforce the Arsenal defense, and it didn't really work out. Now, of course, maybe Arteta would have learned from that mistake, and we can clearly see that White gets a lot of minutes consistently anyways. But I still think when you have fixtures every 3 days, Tomiyasu is probably the best serviceable replacement, for White, compared to someone like Rob Holding is for Gabriel or Saliba, respectively. And I think I have to say the same for Tierney and Zinchenko, where I think Zinchenko so many levels above Tierney. White and Tomiyasu for me is a little bit closer, just because Tomiyasu is such a good replacement. Of course, Tomiyasu could actually sometimes slot in the left back position, so that's the threat that he possesses. But I would say with White, there isn't much of an attacking ceiling as well, so I have to factor that. So I think this is a good week where if you're thinking about going for White to Gabriel for a -4, it's probably okay to do so, because you're going to have Game Week 23, the double there, and then the double in 25, and I think it does make sense as a White owner to move away from him this week. Are you going to get the rewards for going from White to Gabriel or White to Saliba this week? No, but I think the idea is if you can go for it now, then you'll probably feel like you've rewarded yourself for the long term anyways. And when Gabriel beats White in points, unless he actually hits an injury roadblock, then I think that's kind of the landscape of FPL. So I think I'm going to make that move now, but I can understand why people are holding on to White, but that's my personal decision. So I'm going for White to Gabriel as one of my locked transfers for this week. And as you guys know, because based on the limited amount of money I actually have in the bank, that has to come from me reducing one of the other players in my team. But let's actually go into my team selection for Game Week 23. So as you guys know, my Game Week 23 team selection is actually quite simple, and I've already outlined that I'm going to make that White to Gabriel move, so that's going to be one of my transfers this week. And in terms of Trippier, he's going to be a keep just simply because I think the Newcastle defense has been so good, and yes, of course, they lost a clean sheet lately. I think that doesn't really change my opinion on that. And then with Trent, of course, you just keep him because of the doubles with my team structure in place. As far as Shaw, I think he's a very simple play this week because I think Man United do look very good from the attacking point of view, and Shaw is actually a part and parcel of that. And yes, of course, Casemiro and Eriksen being out and therefore allowing the Leeds team to have a little bit more control in the midfield is a little bit more daunting. And you could see that and the impact of that when, let's say, Bruno lost the ball and Nonto was able to score and capitalize off of that early on in the game versus Man United. But overall, I would say United were probably a little bit unfortunate to not come away with the win. Of course, Brendan Aronson did hit the post as well, but I think Leeds were quite fortunate and also were benefiting severely from Nonto playing so well that I don't really see that happening once again for United to actually concede 2 versus Leeds. I think there's a good opportunity here for Shaw to do well once again, and maybe he can even get an assist or hopefully get a clean sheet this week. And that's why I feel like also going out of Shaw is going to be a little bit of a question mark, because for me, Shaw is still a better asset for this United team, or at least for our FPL team structures, if we were to actually keep 2 United players. And I think I'd prefer Shaw and Rashford as a pairing than, let's say, Bruno and Rashford for the future. But maybe I'll change my mind around Game Week 28 based on the blanks and so on and so forth. But as far as the midfielders this week, my one other transfer and the cash cow that leaves my team is going to be Fernandes, who makes way for Odegaard. And the reason why I've gone for Odegaard this week is because I think simply he is someone who's going to be nailed for the foreseeable future. And in this discussion between Odegaard and Nketiah, my thoughts are that Odegaard is not going to be a transfer problem after 25. He might even be a problem by 25, because we're already getting news that Gabriel Jesus is lightly training. Now, of course, he's clearly still several weeks out from actually being able to play a match or even take the starting position away from Nketiah, who's done incredibly well. Maybe there's even an argument to say that Jesus has to come off the bench for a few games and actually find his way back into starting in FPL, but that's going to take away from Nketiah's minutes anyways. Whereas with Odegaard, the only option really is Fabio Vieira taking away minutes from Odegaard, and I think the levels between the two are quite significant, even though actually, ironically, the last time that Brentford were playing Arsenal, I think Fabio Vieira had a very good performance deputizing for Odegaard. But anyways, if we go on to the rest of the team, De Bruyne is someone that I'm very happy with keeping. And the reason why I've actually gone out of Fernandes, because Fernandes, I think, is such an interesting talking point this week, as a lot of people are thinking about whether they're going from Fernandes to Saka or Fernandes to De Bruyne, is my simple thought of, first of all, yes, Fernandes has a fantastic fixture versus Leeds. I think there's going to be another chance where this game is going to be very open. I don't think we've seen, first of all, a permanent manager hire for Leeds just yet. It does seem like the Feyenoord manager might be the target, but I would say that Leeds are probably going to play quite open, and yes, Fernandes is probably going to have a good game again. But I think that Sancho coming back into the team and the game state being quite normal for United, if let's say United were to lead the game early on, I think Fernandes is probably someone who's going to take less of an offensive role. As you can see, between the first and the second half, Fernandes and his attacking positions changed severely. Fernandes was actually someone who was probably playing more of a forward when Weghorst came off the pitch, and he grew into a much more advanced position as the game grew on and as United needed to chase. Now, I think United might actually be able to lead without actually the help of Fernandes. I know it sounds a little bit ridiculous as logic, but you'll actually see that the underlying data that Fernandes, of course, is quite an assistive asset, but less so someone who I think is as much of a goal threat as he was in previous seasons. Now, of course, he's still the penalty taker, but I'm investing here into Odegaard and De Bruyne and the two matches that they have, and also the fact that simply United will have one less fixture when we look at 25. So this is the time for me where it makes sense to move away from Bruno, and I think an Arsenal asset is probably the better option of the two, because City assets have to deal with, first of all, Pep and whatever tinkerings he wants to do. You can see that De Bruyne and Mahrez are clearly both subject to it, where Mahrez was the early sub and De Bruyne becomes the early bench substitute in the previous game versus Tottenham. At the same time, you can also see that Pep will have to play Champions League, and he will probably have to play Mahrez there, and that probably means a little bit less minutes for Mahrez in the Premier League. And I think De Bruyne is someone who we can see clearly has gotten a little bit of rest and rotation. Now, not necessarily versus the teams that we have here, because it seems like Pep's reasons were tactical, and it's mostly based around teams that play a back five structure. The two opponents this week are playing back fours, so I think this is a great week for De Bruyne, but a great week for Mahrez, I'd say probably not. And that's why I think if you're going from Fernandes and you're going for an Arsenal asset like Saka and Odegaard, makes perfect sense. If you're going for De Bruyne, also makes perfect sense. But Mahrez, I'd probably say I'd question it a little bit. As far as Rashford and Saka, though, these are players that are going to be permanent fixtures for my team for the time being, and they're going to be keeps for now. Maybe Saka in the future could also be moved on to for someone like Fernandes if we see Fernandes continue to build on some of the great form that he showed as of late. But I think the underlying still need to pick up a little bit for Fernandes for me to even think about moving away from someone like Saka, who's been so good for me and still actually hasn't got a penalty. So when he gets that penalty, we'll hopefully get one of those crazier kind of double-digit point games in the future. And last but not least, let's actually head to the forwards. And I've actually gone for a captaincy of Haaland and a vice captaincy of Saka. And you can see, because I didn't go for Nketiah, I've actually kept Mitrovic on my team. And of course, that was probably preempted as well with Gnonto on the bench. But the reality is Mitrovic, this is the key fixture for me to assess whether I really want to keep him. There are options to move him into, but I think the midfield has been a little bit more of an electric position. And I can see myself going towards the structure where I incorporate Mitoma in my team in Gameweek 26. So that means I'm probably looking towards playing something like a 3-5-2 on a permanent basis after Game Week 25. So that's kind of my thoughts on that. I also have to consider whether Gnonto continues to develop well, how Leeds are doing as well, because he could be a great asset going forwards, because we know Gnonto has been simply electric. And I think, yes, he plays out wide quite often, so he's almost the reverse out of position forward, but he has been someone who has been looking forwards to still make this kind of inside run. And I think we saw that in the previous two games, that he's been able to create consistent chances for himself. So I hope his continued development will actually mean good things for my team and my FPL team going forward specifically. So as far as Mitrovic, this is the game where he has to prove really whether he should stay in my team. Of course, he's someone who does play in 25, but sooner or later, I think we might have a question mark over Mitrovic if he fails to deliver. Ultimately, I think he has been quite reliant on penalties, the success of them, but also he has been rejected from points, I would say, also from missing some of these penalties. But he's also been quite fortunate overall to get so many penalties as he has this season. Not many strikers have had the same sort of chances. If you look at someone like Saka, for example, who's the penalty taker, he just hasn't really been able to benefit from them as much as someone like Mitrovic has in terms of the chances he's been given. So I think there is a bit of an overinflation, of course, in the early games where Mitrovic was arguably fixture-proof, but he's just come through a run of games where he's been playing versus some very, very tough defensive teams. If we have to be honest with ourselves, I think our thoughts on Chelsea are that they have improved as a defense. Our thoughts on Tottenham is that they have always been a good defense. So I think these are the kind of fixture runs where you'd probably judge Mitrovic once again and have a look and see whether he actually deserves to stay in our teams. And for now, he does. Haaland gets the captaincy from me. I just think Aston Villa is a great game, and ultimately for me the ceiling is still always there with Erling Haaland. He could simply just get a hat-trick in the Aston Villa game, and maybe Arsenal will be able to keep him out. But that's still a very tough ask. And of course, with Saka, Odegaard, De Bruyne, these are all assets that could do well, get some multi-digit hauls. We've already seen Odegaard do that. But I have just much more faith in the consistency of Erling Haaland. So that's going to be how I play the chip, hoping that vice captain wise, Saka will do well with a penalty. I don't really expect him to be my captain anyways, but him getting a penalty will be lovely, because of course he's probably one of the assets in this team that have the least amount of effective ownership outside of the terrible pick named Trent in my team. But that's going to be Gameweek 23, my team selection. Hope you guys have a wonderful week ahead, and I'll see you guys shortly.